Together we don't stand. There is power in our union. Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood and mistakes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Manns, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the September 11th, 2023 show. It is the 470th show that we have done since the closing of the North Adams Regional Hospital, and is the 10th show that we have done since the announcement of its possible reopening. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is: we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights, and are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as is our custom, we put the emphasis on Article 23 at the start of the show, and because we have 4 people on the panel, 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, number 1, everyone has the right to work, the free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment.
Number 2, everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for herself or himself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection.
Number 4, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of his or her interests.
Just as a joke, it took Michael 3 seconds to clear his throat. Anyway, as is our custom, also we give a thank you to Michael Putnam, who is the program director for WMNB LP 107.1, for airing the audio portions of our show on Fridays at 6 p.m. and possibly at other times throughout the week. And to the fabulous staff at Northern Berkshire Community Television Corporation, Joanne Hurlbut, Nicole Brown, and David Fabiano for helping us produce our show. Without them, this would never happen. And
Got that right.
And we have to say welcome, a warm welcome to both Michael and Rachel for joining us today on the show. And Dick has a special topic for 9/11.
Yeah, so we're pre-recording this, but on the day that this is shown, it's going, it's September 11th. Mm-hmm. And, our hearts go out to all those who lost loved ones during that terrible criminal act, which, brought down those 2 towers. And then our hearts also go out to all the soldiers and all the civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan that lost their lives too. But, pulling things back right now in this country, I guess, we're having an outbreak of violence in our own country.
Yes, we are.
Racist
Driven
outbreak.
violence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So on Democracy Now! This week, on the September 5th show, Reverend Barber was on the show, and he talked about the racist shootings don't happen in a vacuum. Bishop Barber on DeSantis, Trump, and those who spread hate. And so, as federal law enforcement opened its investigation into the Jacksonville, Florida shooting, where a white man killed 3 black people at a Dollar General as a possible hate crime and an act of domestic violence extremism, they're going to speak to civil rights leader Bishop William Barber, the head of the Poor People's Campaign. So we took about a 10-minute clip of that, and I encourage you to go to democracynow.org and watch the entire thing. But we just want to use it as a starting point for this discussion.
And the suggestion is that these are the problems. Now, we know that this is this division and distraction. They use hate rhetoric and culture wars to distract from the areas that he's failed as a governor, which I'd like to talk about in a second. But this has a history. In the early 1900s, Woodrow Wilson spewed hate, called Birth of a Nation, that glorified the Klan, the history that the nation needed. And in a few years, what did you have? You had Red Summer. where black men and others were killed and run out of town all over this country in reaction to what was being spewed by the president. In 1963, you had an Alabama governor, George Wallace, say segregation yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He loosed the idea that black people were the problem, that fight for integration was the problem. By the end of the year, you had people blown up in Birmingham, dogs sicked on children, children blown up in Alabama. And if you continue down this road, in 1960, August 27, 1960, the Florida legislature, the extremists, the Dixiecrats, were railing against integration. They were pushing all kind of divisive rhetoric. Even the governor, who was a moderate at the time, Collins, but he had said that the Supreme Court had overreached. What happened? You had the axe handle mob in Jacksonville, where white mobs brought axe handles and beat black men while the police watched until black men started fighting back, and then they joined in. So there is this history of not just who kills, but what kills and what creates the atmosphere. And spewing hate from the most powerful levels of government gives license. It others people. It puts it in the ethos and suggests that it's all right to eliminate folks. So what happens is this guy goes to a black HBCU. But he's been hearing all the while that black history is a problem. It's a lie. Wokeness is a lie. So if he's already skewed toward racism, then he begins to hear from the most powerful people, this is what you do. It can trigger. We're not saying DeSantis did to kill it, but as Dr. King said at the funeral of the 4 girls that were killed, he said, we must not just talk about who, but what killed them. And lastly, I want to put this on the record. It's not just DeSantis. Down in Florida, he has gotten black people, certain black scholars, to join with him in lies about black history and calling for the elimination of courses. He's gotten black people to join him, some of them, to join him in pushing against affirmative action program. They're just as guilty as well, because it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. Once you spew this stuff and loose it and suggest that people are the problem, they're not just people with problems, but problem people, it can create all kinds of justifications in the ethos for violence and other kinds of death.
And Bishop Barber, I wanted to ask you, in the same climate of intolerance and hate that is promoted by some of these top Florida leaders, we see a judge rule on a redistricting case, congressional redistricting in North Florida, saying that DeSantis and the other political leaders violated the state's constitution, ordering them to create a new map. Your response to this news?
Well, I know about that in North Carolina. We beat back extremists who redistricted, and we beat them in court, found out that they had engaged in racism with surgical intention. And what we know what redistricting is another form of diversion and division and lies, because what it says is that somehow people are cheating, somehow people are not doing right. But what the extremists, they want to cheat because they can't win. They can't win on policies. So what they want to do is create a situation where they stack, pack, and bleach black voters, not just so black people can't elect black people, but so black people and white people and others can't form fusion coalition to elect the candidates of their choice. And why do they do this? Why are they so afraid? Because DeSantis and those with him, they don't want to talk about the real record. That's why they redistrict illegally. That's why they engage in culture war. They don't want to talk about Florida. There are 9 million poor and low-wealth people, 44% of the state, and their policies aren't doing anything about that. They don't want to talk about the 7 million voters in Florida that are poor and low wealth, and if just 3% of them would vote, that haven't voted, they could send any of them home. They don't want to talk about the fact that in Florida, over 4 million people make less than a living wage, while the legislature there and the governor there have been blocking living wages. They don't want to talk about that's 32% of white workers and 57% of black workers. They don't want to talk about the fact that you have over 2 million people in Florida, 2.5 million people who are uninsured, even during the pandemic, and that the life in Florida, the life expectancy went down in Florida. And one study shows that among Republicans, their life expectancy went down, and it's directly connected to the ways DeSantis and others like him railed against vaccines, railed against protections during COVID. They don't want to talk about the fact that 8.4 million workers, 78% of the workforce, do not have access to paid leave. They don't want to talk about when you end cuts in Medicaid, 800,000 people who lost access to health care. See, they support all of that, those policies. So they don't want to talk about this. So where do they want to focus? They want to focus on cultural wars and division and dissension, and they want to fight for redistricting, racist redistricting, which undermines the ability for votes to count. And that's why when we criticize them, we can't just talk about hate. We've got to make the connections. One of the things we've said to Democrats is don't just talk about the deaths that are caused when somebody uses a gun to kill. Connect that to the deaths that come when people are kept in poverty. Poverty is now the 4th leading cause of death. So if you are fighting addressing poverty and fighting addressing living wages and fighting addressing health care, that is also a form of death and a form of violence. We have to connect the dots. Racist voter suppression creates death because when you suppress the right to vote and you stack and pack and bleach black voters, you allow extremists to get elected who then, once they get elected, they block health care, they block living wages, they block addressing poverty. And when you do those things, people die. Bad public policy creates death. Racist rhetoric and division can create a context of death, give people the license to kill. All of it is deadly, and we must take back the mic, raise up an army of love and truth and life that will say, we're not having it anymore. We're going to call you to cease, desist, to repent, to confess, and if you won't, then we've got to mobilize and send some people home so that they won't have the power and the mic to continue to do what they're doing. They may have the same opinion, but they won't have the power and the power of the office and the mic to continue to spew their divisive rhetoric.
And Bishop Barber, I wanted to ask you, in this recent Hurricane Idalia, clearly the country is facing, and the world is facing, more and more natural disasters, so many of them fueled by climate change. President Biden goes down to Florida, and the Governor DeSantis doesn't even bother to meet with him. Your response to the president's words, especially he spoke out against the attack, this racist attack, as well as offering assistance to the people of Florida ravaged by the Idalia.
Well, you know, DeSantis, though he's trained and educated even at Yale and got a law degree, he's rooted in racism and meanness. He's decided that this is his way to office: distraction, division, deflection, focusing on cultural wars so that he cannot be labeled as a failed governor. That's what he really is, not a presidential candidate. He's a failed governor. Anytime you have this many poor, low-wage people and low-wage workers and you haven't addressed those issues, you're a failed governor. The president was right to call out the racism and call out the rhetoric and say that if private or publicly, if you're quiet, then you're complicit. I would also encourage the president to go one step further, though, and that is to say it's not just the racist rhetoric. The racist rhetoric and the cultural wars and the hatred toward women, the hatred toward immigrants, the hatred toward the trans community is a form of deflection. And then the president run the record and show how this same person who's spewing all of this division, guess what? He's not addressing the issue of poverty in your state. He's not addressing more than 40% of the people working for less than a living wage, even though the people voted for a living wage to happen in Florida. He's not addressing the more than 2.5 million people that don't have health care. In other words, connect the rhetoric, not just to the deaths that are caused by someone like the young man who did what he did in creating the ethos of death, but actually show how they are failing in their roles as governors and legislators. And that's why they want the division and the deflection and deception, so that we don't see how they're also engaging in forms of policy violence and policy murder, which is hurting the lives of people. And it doesn't have to be this way. Imagine if this same governor was bringing people together, was raising the minimum wage, was ensuring health care, and those things. Florida would be a very, very different place. He does not want people to look at that, and so he's posturing himself like the Dixiecrat governors of the old South, and we need a new South to rise that's not fooled by that, that brings black people together, white people together, brown people, Asian, Latinos, gay, straight, it doesn't matter who you are, and says we're not having it anymore. We're taking back the mic, we're mobilizing, and we're going to do it. Because the fact of the matter is, Ron, if just 2 to 3% of poor and low-wealth voters in Florida who have not voted chose to vote an agenda, they could send any candidate home, including Ron DeSantis. Poor and low-wealth folk have the power. That's what Bishop Frank Reed and others are saying. they understand, and why they're calling for this is that there comes a time, the Bible says, when the stone that the builders rejected have to rise up and become the cornerstone of a new reality. That's what we're going to launch on Thursday and beyond. It must happen not just in Florida, but across the country. Take back this mic.
Unpacked a lot, didn't he?
Yeah, and he talked about the South, and I just want to remind you a famous quote that I remember about now I'm not remembering his name.
You'll think of it in a minute.
Well, anyways, he said the South is anywhere south of the Canadian border.
Very true.
Malcolm X.
Yes, that sounds like it's just hidden more up in the Northeast than in the northern states than it is, and
It's all over, and
it
I
is
have
all
so
over.
many thoughts listening to this, and I first learned about the real racism in Berkshire County when I was 16 years old. And my whole life has been about that and human rights. And I will come back and say, yes, take back the mic and the whole thing. People, I believe, have to get involved on the local level. Part of the problem are the entrenched politicians that you cannot get out of office. When he's saying if you get 3% of poor people to vote, people who are struggling just to put food on the table and then might be threatened by voting. There are a lot of ingredients that go into whether a person who's poverty-stricken or disabled or elderly has the ability to be able to go register, vote and organize. And that's part of the divide and conquer, and that's part of the horror show that's going on in this country right now. But even, I'm in that very under low income. I tried to get a COVID test yesterday. They are now covered by Mass Health. Do you know they had those tests in Walgreens in Pittsfield where I went to get it? But they didn't have the one that the store gave to people who were on Mass Health. So I was not able to get a COVID test. I am a musician for the VA. I play every other week except this time because of September 11th. I'm playing 3 weeks in a row. I will not go there without doing a COVID test. And I was not able to get one. CVS doesn't have any to sell. I will try again. I do know where I live now in Dalton, the health department is providing them to our apartment. Everything he said, I understand. I do believe that you have to meet people one-on-one. There are good and bad people all throughout the world. There are some realities that have to be accepted, I believe, about what's really going on. And this hate has been going on since people from Africa were enslaved. And my ancestors are part of that responsibility. And the indigenous people that were
Nearly wiped out.
yes,
Eugenically.
genocide were nearly wiped out. The genocide that was committed and that some of my Gallup ancestors did. So this is a history, and I don't know all these words, progressive and woke. Please, it's all about telling the truth.
Well, I think
It's all about telling the truth and getting involved, making a commitment personally to get involved in some way.
and have compassion. I think he mentioned that just blaming people, not thinking that
That's easy.
people have problems, not thinking people have problems, just blaming people. And this thing about woke, the first time I heard someone say woke, and it's in this mindset of people that are watching certain news channels.
I
and
never
they
knew
talk
I was
about
asleep, right?
Woke, right, exactly. That's the only thing I can draw it to is like in Buddhism. The thing is, the goal in Buddhism,
Enlightenment?
to become enlightened, to become awake, to have knowledge. So waking up, rather than sleeping.
But everyday people don't know what that means.
Right.
I don't know what it means.
Well, woke,
No,
right.
They don't know what woke means.
But,
They just-
I remember George Carlin saying, if you believe in the American dream, you have to be sleeping to have a dream, he said. He said, you must be sleeping. But if you wake up and you see what's happening around you, and you have consciousness and knowledge, but you also have compassion, that there's nothing wrong with being awakened or understanding the world around you. as long as you have compassion along with it and stop blaming people. You know, we have to set a floor where we don't have people in poverty. So we have to get those people who are in poverty to raise their voices. You know?
Well, that's what I've been doing. And of course, I never expected, coming out of one of the wealthiest families in the Commonwealth, that I'd wind up. And of course, we know the stories, but also part of it is discrimination against women that did not contribute to my Social Security. I cannot survive on my Social Security because of all those years I worked and the lack of contribution. So there are a lot of ingredients that go into
Right.
what
It's
is
just
happy for
not
people.
personal. Like, I think, you know, Dick Gregory said it once, and he had an album called Light Side, Dark Side. You know, you have the right to the Constitution. You want to hate me. You can hate me. You have that right.
That's okay.
He goes, I don't mind that. I mean, I just don't want to have anything to do with you.
Yeah.
But he said it's the stinking racist institutions, or like the sexist institutions, like you're saying, the laws set up caused you to get less Social Security. It's not one man hating you, it's the way the laws are set up.
But those
that
were set up
cause
by
you-
people.
Right,
Yes, they
right.
were.
But those laws have to be changed. So they're institutional racism, you know? So people that have wealth, you know, people that are poor pay taxes. Every time they buy an item in the store, they pay taxes. And it's a bigger percentage of their income than if you're a billionaire that doesn't pay any money unless, you know, if they're trading stocks or buying stocks, selling stocks, those things aren't taxed. You know, they,
But then you have someone like Governor Healy vetoing
Things that
Community
would-
Action Council funds.
right. we
Those
talked
are
about-
programs that are I was a recipient of that program. It got the house I owned at the time with siding and, not siding.
So let's also put it this way. Her veto proves that the institutionalism is still there because the emphasis was
complicit.
not on helping the people who need help,
Right.
but
We need-
on
Right.
something else.
Because the people need to vote. They don't have the political clout. And that's what I think Reverend Barber is talking about in this revival. And he's talking about us getting active within the community. And I have one thing that I can share with you. I'm a member of the City Democratic Committee.
Yeah.
And every 4 years, the City Democratic Committee and also the Republican Committee and other committees can do this. You get elected during the primary ballots, and you can get yourself on the primary ballot. So you can go down to City Hall and get a nomination paper to be on a town committee. You can be, if you live in Ward 3, that's where that I'm the temporary chair of that, you can sign up to be on that ward. You know, the committees are real small and very inactive throughout the state, but it's for a reason, because that helps the people who are in power stay in power. But if more people at the grassroots level, like we have room for 35 people to be nominated, to be on
But
that.
Rich, you need, you have to have people that you can support and elect.
But these
And,
are the people,
and we also
they
need
can vote
open
for
primaries.
themselves. But they can vote for themselves. And they can get on a committee and start organizing by neighborhoods.
I think Dick's thought is that if you want to get rid of the entrenched people, you have to vote them out. And you
Or
have to create a
influence,
block.
or influence the
them.
entrenched people,
Yeah.
because you
And
have
this is a step in that direction. It's sort of, he's trying to
to
marry
get
it to what
active.
Barbara was
Right,
saying.
to get active. Register
Get
to
active,
vote.
which is what you want
Register to
people to
vote,
do.
vote,
active.
but then get active in whatever political party you want to get active in. I chose to do it in the Democratic Party. We don't have a working families party in Massachusetts like they have in New York State, but whatever party, but get active. Get off your couch and get out there and organize.
Wait a minute, we got
hear from Mike.
we got to turn over to Mike. Sorry, Rich, I know you
It's okay.
What? You go ahead.
but we got to be fair.
Go ahead, seriously.
No, I'm just going to say, here you're talking about racism, and I've been the subject of that. And I was a candidate for mayor in 17, 19, and 21. And in 21, I was racially slurred, and so my second husband was a man of color, and I have been attacked because of that. So I am also an object of what he's talking about. So there are, and I can go on and on and on, but yes, Mike, you really need
Well,
to
I
say
will.
something because
You see,
I get on.
See, my problem, I do items that people really don't want to talk about. I fought for the low-income housing at one time. We took on HUD. Powerful company. Well, we went all the way around on that one, and they're supposed to do something. Well, man did it. They're supposed to give me so many copies of the minutes of the meetings. And, you know, you wanted me to pay, which is fine. Then he comes up with a payment plan, because this is HUD talking to him. $75. I said, what? $75 for what? Minutes of the meeting? I said, you got to be able to. So I called up HUD. I said, look, I don't want to play games. This man's supposed to give me $75? They said, that's not the deal. I said, good, take care of it. They did. He got a reprimand. I got the information I needed, $750. He got mad at me because, well, you know, that stays in my record. I said, then you shouldn't have done it. I don't play games. Sometimes you got to fight.
You have to organize.
And the problem here is you got to make sure you say things that affect the people you really want to see help. And believe me, I fought for the homeless people. I fought for the jobs, you name it. I've been there. And sometimes I even went to Washington, D.C., by God. Took them on up there. Happy to see me, too.
Yep.
Well, I want to recommend that, a lot of times they say, like, this shooter in Jacksonville he acted alone. And I just want to, recommend this book. I've just ordered it. I haven't read it, but I heard the author talking about it, and her name is Kathleen Blue, and it's called Bring the War Home, White Power Movement and the Paramilitary America. And what she talks about is returning to a country ripped apart by a war they felt they're allowed to win. A small group of Vietnam veterans and disgruntled civilians who shared their virulent anti-communism and potential sense of betrayal concluded that waging war on their own country was justified. There's such a hateful group on the internet, and people who are suicidal and need mental health, and they end up going to the internet and they hear this racist, spewed things, and they cause people to go out and shoot and violently kill black people, anti-Semitic, going after Jews or
LGBTQ
plus.
Right.
I may also
Eventually
suggest
it'll
that
be
you go
women.
that people Google, if you can, on the internet, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which really has a
Right.
huge discussion on hate crimes, and the rise in it is terrible, the white power and the supremacy.
Or the Anti-Defamation League. We
Yes,
had
yes.
on our last two shows ago, we had a woman on from the Anti-Defamation League talking about how anti-Semitic and racist statements and attacks in Massachusetts has gone up by like 40% in just the past year.
Frightening times.
And it's proof that when you get the license from the politicians, it just spreads like wildfire.
Right. So
And
we have to
putting
take the
the
mic.
genie in the back in the bottle is
Yeah.
going to be a long healing process.
Right. I remember the play Arturo Ui by Bertolt Brecht. He talked about Hitler and Nazism, and he said, the bitch that bore that dog is in heat again.
Power to
Okay,
the
the
people.
people, because we're done.
There's power in the factory, power in the land, power in the hand of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in our union. Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. The strikes of the bosses we must fight for. From the cities and the farmlands to trenches.